Find me the big ones, the biggest ones. I want the big...
The Titans. Some of the oldest beings in the Transformers universe. Colossal entities that have accomplished great deeds, pivotal in Cybertronian history, but that have also inflicted absolute horrors. They are beings that rarely get happy endings, and in this vid, I'm gonna look across the continuities at as many as I can.
It's Halloween, you know.
Oh god damn it, right in the middle of my dramatic intro! Give you some production value, you know, trying to get this thing to sound dramatic and stuff. Right, fine, I'll use your avatar, just so they know you exist. I'm sure they all care that you exist. It's said that only a Titan can match another Titan, considering their outrageous size and devastating weaponry, meaning that they can level vast areas and huge numbers of enemy assets. These guys are up there with the most powerful beings in the Transformers universe, being second only to Unicron and the Primes, maybe a couple of others. And their most widely accepted backstory is that they're ancient bots from a bygone era of Cybertron that transformed either into Colossal Starship, which played a part in seeding Cybertronian life on other worlds, before, in some cases at least, turning into cities and going dormant. Now when I say cities, I think we have to use the term kind of loosely. They are most often more like small, dense clusters of buildings rather than a full city, but still turn into these enormous beings that are so devastating that they are coveted by both sides of the Civil War. But yeah, most of them seeded their life, then went dormant for so long that most stopped believing that they even existed. And they became myth. There were some in the comics, I think it was the 2019 IDW ones, I think it was, that were dormant for so long they turned into a whole goddamn mountain range. A good example of this is the Dweller. Not to be confused with the creature from Gen 1 of the same name, which was basically this indestructible creation of the Quintessans that would turn you into a zombie. This is the one from Cyberverse, from an ep called Dweller in the Depth, where Windblade accidentally awoke this guy and he possessed Hammerby to help to get Windblade to assimilate the entire population of Cybertron. He's basically a robotic version of Cthulhu who's banished to the depths of the Argon Sea and had this weird mind control gas, that enabled telepathic control of the subject. And the scariest thing is that at the end of the ep, he's still down there. He's still under the depths, down there somewhere, just waiting for his next opportunity to get his vengeance. The next ones I wanted to talk about weren't really Titans in the sense that we are talking about here. They were just referred to as Titans, and that's the Titans from Fall of Cybertron. Seeing as I just played through that game on my gaming channel, you can check it out if you want. I thought they were worth a mention. They were nowhere near as big as Titans, normal Titans.
Titans.
They probably weren't even as big as a combiner.
Titans.
Next, let's talk about the first ever Titan to appear in Transformers. I've spoken about Trypticon many times on the channel, so you probably know the score. Immense size, unfathomable strength, arm to the teeth, but not too bright.
Yay!
And yeah, I know this looks goofy because of the 80s animation, but he is unleashing all kinds of havoc here, let's face it.
Yay!
Anyway, this went on until Blur and Wheelie managed to get Metroplex's transformation cog functional and get him in to counter and eventually defeat Trypticon and yeet him into the ocean. Damn, he flies like forever. Look, he's still flying, he's still going, Whoa! Down a mountain, over a mountain. Trypticon was next seen teaming up with Octane, and the pair stole various landmarks and gold and stuff before, whatever. As Titans often do, he had a few component transformers, namely Full Tilt, Brunt, that formed Trypticon's main cannon, and Wipeout, or Necro as he was sometimes called, who would sneak ahead and carry out recon work for his oversized compadre. Anyway, in the Prime Wars cartoons, he actually played a pretty big part in the plot. Starscream, or technically Starscream's ghost, or technically his disembodied spark, remember his spark is technically immortal, managed to get control over Trypticon and sent him rampaging through the mean streets of Iacon, and he was only killed because the big dummy swallowed the Matrix of Leadership. In the Dreamwave continuity, he was one of the Decepticons' early military projects to create a mobile command base, but in this one he eventually came to doubt the Decepticon cause and even began to mull over taking over leadership of the faction, so he's much more than just a lumbering brute in this one. Actual characterization. In IDW's continuity, one legend said that he had been sealed away by the mythical Knights of Cybertron. That is until Scorponok learned of his existence and ordered a huge bombing raid to awaken the Big Saurian. Here he unleashed an army of cybermorphic predator, like these kind of dragons that live deep in his inner workings somewhere.
He did it in Transformers vs. G.I. Joe 2.
Optimus gave them a blast of the Matrix, and sure, it took care of them pretty good, but when he turned it on Trypticon himself, the Big Stomper put his big stompers down on the poor Robo-Jesus and flattened him. I know, right? He was fine. He would just come back at Robo-Easter anyway. He then devoured Grimlock and Megatron, but that only enabled them to access his innards, and they managed to destroy his energy core. My favorite version of the character, though, was the War for Cybertron one, who was a space-based base. Yes, a space-based base, who was initially used as a base for conducting experiments deemed too dangerous to be conducted on the planet. At the start of War for Cybertron, he was neutral, having been created before the start of the Civil War by Alpha Trion, and he was watched over and guarded by the Seekers, before being forced into robot mode by the aerial bots, and then forced into the Decepticon flagship warcruiser, the Nemesis. Also transformed into a Klingon battlecruiser once. That was pretty cool. In Cyberverse, he and his lackeys would roam the galaxy, freezing entire populations with the Time Blaster and stealing all of their stuff, before Trypticon would have one of his epic rampages and wreck up the place. I get a feeling you can't be an evil Titan and not wreck up the place. Do you know what I mean? Now, let's talk about Trypticon's nemesis, the thorn in his Saurian side, Metroplex, who according to IDW was one of the first 3 Titans created.
Possibly even the first.
Interestingly, these guys were the only Transformers to have a built-in space bridge, which of course is a huge tactical advantage, enabling instantaneous travel across. You know what a space bridge is. Now, the way I think this worked is that you would have one Titan on one planet, let's say Earth, and then another Titan on, say, Cybertron, and then if you wanted to travel between them, like the Titan would have to take you and then put you in his belly, and then go, you want to go across space? I'll put you in my belly. So then he'd grab you and he'd put you in his belly or whatever, and then the other Titan on Cybertron would just be like, pew, and shoot you out of his belly. So it'd just be a whole lot of... And the thing is, there was 3 of these Titans originally made, so you could just be in a whole triangle of belly, 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 belly. Also, interestingly, Metroplex shared a kind of hive mind, kind of telepathy with the other Titans. And most interestingly, these guys have a kind of super spark that is not only A, powerful enough to give life to these behemoths, not only B, can sustain the entire civilizations that he's currently seeding at the time, but also C, exist on different planes of existence at the same time. What? Anyway, when the other Titans left Cybertron with the Knights of Cybertron to spread life and light and happies across the universe...
That was strange.
Oh, yeah, that was strange? In IDW 2005, he didn't leave with the other Titans to expand the Cybertronian Empire, instead going dormant under the city of Nion before being forgotten and becoming myth. But once he was awoken, he managed to survive having Trypticon dropped on him from space, only to be impaled by a Quintessa ship. He single-handedly took out half of the Decepticon army. In War for Cybertron, he punched Megatron into the ground, into literal breadcrumbs. But he also got shot point-blank range by one of these giant warp cannons, and then chose to give the last of his energon to enable the Autobots' escape. Like Trypticon, he has 3 smaller component bots, Scamper, Six Gun, and Slammer, and the most memorable storyline in G1, at least to me, was when the Ghost of Starscream made a deal with Unicron to steal Metroplex's eyes to restore sight to the Chaos Bringer. And then basically halfway through removing his fucking eye from the inside of his head, Metroplex woke up and went into a literal blind rage. Blind rage, get it? And his rampage was only stopped when Scourge detonated a photon charge that he'd placed in his head. But other than that, in G1, his adventures were mainly to do with the bots trying to find or fix his transformation cog so he could come and fight Trypticon for them and yeet him back into the sea or whatever. In the Japanese continuity, he took over the leadership of the Autobots on Earth at one point after Six-Shot killed Ultra Magnus. And he participated in the final battle between Autobot and Decepticon armies at the North Pole, which finally saw the Decepticons beaten and all of the Transformers withdraw from the planet. And nobody likes withdrawing, let's face it. It's fine. In the Transformers Generations manga, Metroplex was rebuilt to be even bigger after being beaten by Metro Titan, who we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yeah, the Nebulans helped the Autobots upgrade the big dude, and he unleashed a blast from his antimatter projector onto Metro Titan, which took him down but left Metroplex drained of energy, so he couldn't finish the job. And nobody likes not being able to finish, let's face it. Well, let's move on. Cheela was another of the first Titans created in the IDW universe, known as the Golden Warrior. It was one of the few Beast Former Titans. It was said to be faster than any other Titan, and was famous for its speed, having used its speed to save Cybertron from a comet. Cheela had a great and deep bond with Onyx Prime, and worked with him to create a better world for the Beast Formers, eventually colonizing the world of Eucharis for them to live on. using that super spark of his to spawn a whole civilization for them. Onyx made Sheila swear to protect Eucharis from standard formers, as he was still massively distrustful of them because of how the beast formers were treated on Cybertron. So when Windblade arrived with Starscream, Sheila awoke from his dormancy, and after Windblade tried and failed to reason with him using her city speaker talents, Starscream managed to get inside his body and killed him by destroying his brain module. Known and famous for being stubborn, Metroplex later said that Sheila was so steadfast that he would never have allowed anyone to sway him from the promise that he'd made to Onyx. Let's talk about Metro Titan, the third of the so-called three originals, who confusingly looked exactly like Metroplex. First appearing in the Japanese Gen 1 continuity, he was built by the Autobots and named after the moon he was built on, Saturn's moon, Titan. But in this continuity, he soon defected to the Decepticons, although I don't exactly know why. He was integrated into IDW's 2005 continuity, where he lay dormant until Die Atlas began harvesting his energies to provide power to his faction called the Circle of Light. He was then kind of brainwashed by Shockwave, who was disguised as Onyx Prime, and he would eventually become Optimus's Autobot city on Earth, and helped out in battles, as well as linking with Metroplex back on Cybertron to form the Space Bridge. Eventually, Onyx, Shockwave, believing that Metro Titan had outlived his usefulness, ordered Nemesis, his own Titan, to blow a hole through his chest before later executing him himself. And while we're on Metroplex doppelgangers, let's talk about a Titan called Quintessa. And I know what you're thinking, not the Bayverse Quintessa. So as I mentioned in my video on the Primes, or did I? He was partnered with Quintus Prime. So at one point, Megatron put together this new faction called Titan Hunters and sent them out looking for these colossal beasts.
Find me the big ones, the biggest ones. I want the biggest.
Anyway, they managed to locate the Titan known as Quintessa, and long story short, he inadvertently teleported himself and Waspinator to interdimensional space, where the two formed this weird bond, and by some weirdness, Waspinator ended up in charge of one of the most destructive forces in the universe. And through a bizarre mixing of Shockwave's ores, he turned into a fearsome undead version of himself. He then stood inert for God knows how long before Starscream landed on his shoulder, which I think introduced another ore into the mix and caused him to blast out a huge radius purple blast of purple energy. Boom! Vaporizing some, infecting others with Death Plague, and bringing the dead back to life. Shocky Baby then stole Waspinator's stinger, which, like the glowy stinging ass wand that it is, could be used to direct the Necro Titan's destructive talents. And of course, Shocky Baby directed them straight towards the city of Iacon. Go rampage, buddy! Rampage away! So all of the Transformers unite against Quintessa the Necro Titan, right? But that didn't even make the Titan blink until Metroplex showed up, got powered up with Ore 7, and finally neutralized the Necro Titan. So we've had Metroplex, Metro Titan, Necro Titan, but we are not done yet. We've still got Metro Base from the Japanese Gen 1. And as far as I understand it, this could be set up as a ground base, but also a space station, but he didn't have a transformation cog, so he couldn't help fight the treacherous Metro Titan. Remember, in the Japanese continuity, Metro Titan turned to the dark side. No! Metro Base was also in the IDW storyline and was closest to Alchemist Prime. No one knows exactly what happened to Metro Base, but we do know that he was dead by the time that Unicron attacked the Cybertronian colonies. The only known detail about him was that he wound up on a planet called Arduria, which was frozen by Shockwave's Ore 6. I want to give Fortress Maximus his own video at some point, so I'm not going to talk about him too much here, but he is really one of my favorite bots. Scorponok started out as a Titan, a triple changer that not only had a giant Scorpion mode, but also a base mode that could take off into space. But that was before he was shrunk down to just being like a big bot, kind of like Grimlock or one of those guys. I did a whole video on this guy, and he actually ends up being the principal bad guy more often than you think. I'll link that video up in the corner, but as I mentioned, he awoke and unleashed a Titan. He tried to overthrow Megatron and Galvatron. He has a few mass murders to his name, and he just loves squishing damn heads. Alright, let's do one from Cyberverse just to mix it up a little, and let's start with Croaton. So after the colony that he founded was attacked by Quintessans, who took a number of his colonists hostage and bombarded him from orbit, which nearly killed him, the Quintessans left him for dead. As fate would have it, the Ark flew through the solar system in question, where he managed to make psychic contact with Windblade, who revived him with the help of the Allspark. He went after the colonists that had been stolen by the Quintessans, but they managed to capture him in a tractor beam and turned him into their slave, giving him a bunch of technological upgrades in the process. They sent him to fight fellow Titan Iaconus, who we'll talk about in just a second, and Croaton wasn't able to best him, in spite of the numerous upgrades he'd been given. You'll understand better when we talk about Iaconus in a second, but basically Croaton then turned on the smaller Cybertronians, and it was only because Windblade managed to break the Quintessence mind control and free him from their evil, sinewy clutches. And after all was said and done, and a truce was reached between the Autobots and the Decepticons, Croaton became the Decepticon capital city. Okay, next, Iaconus, a being whose thirst for carnage matches his enormous stature. He's a war titan, meaning that carnage and conflict is a need for him, to the point that once he's defeated all his enemies, he will turn on whoever's left, be they allies or bystanders or whatever. Like the other titans, he left Cybertron to colonize, although colonization wasn't his priority, waging war was. It sounds like there actually were a number of war titans, and they battled each other throughout what was known as the Violent Epoch, until only Iaconus was left standing. His violent ways meant that he was unable to adjust to the peacetime that followed, and his own crew had to bring him down to stop him laying waste to everything. The last survivor of his crew, Macadam, ensured his existence remained a secret, being cloaked beneath the city of Iacon. When the Autobots figured they could use him to fend off the Quintessence, Macadam warned them what would happen after the foes were defeated. But nope, they didn't listen and revived him anyway, and I guess it's kind of handy that they did, because after the Quintessence got control of Croaton, Iaconus was the only way to respond in kind. And as I just said, even with Croaton's upgrades, he was no match for the War Titan, and Iaconus would have killed him had it not been for Starscream, who managed to teleport Iaconus' head away with Unspace, which forced him to transform back into City Mode. Another bot that was never specifically referred to as a Titan was Teletran 1 from War for Cybertron Kingdom, or as he's sometimes called, Arcbot. In a jaw-dropping moment, the Ark, this ship that we've all seen 1,000 times, something that we're all just used to kind of being there. Wait, I've just noticed, has he got his arm around Primal? Hold me, Megzy. I guess combined with the consciousness of Teletran 1 to turn into this. Seriously, the only way this could have been better would have been if the Nemesis would have taken on its robot mode, which I guess would have been Trypticon, for an all-out Titan fight. Divisian is an interesting one. Another of the IDW Titans, you know the story by now, left with the Knights of Blah to spread Cybertronian enlightenment across the Blah, colonize Blah. However, the planet he chose was not just populated with these little dudes, it was also close to a star that had super strong and strange gravitational forces, which probably had something to do with him crashing and dying. His hotspot carried on birthing Cybertronians though, but again, the star's gravitational powers messed it all up, so they were born in bonded pairs. So they were just like happy life partners, I think. Or maybe like conjoined. No, let's go with the first thing. Tempo was kind of the same. He was Vector Prime's Titan, and he was the first to leave with the Knights of Blah to Blah in the Cybertronians' mission of Blah-de-Blah. And it's not known what happened to him, although it's thought that he may have landed on a planet called LV-117, which was a weird place because it was kind of floating through space-time, having somehow become detached from the linear time stream. To you and me, like to people still in the regular time stream, this planet would seem to disappear as it slipped out of the present and then would reappear at some point in the future. Lost to all space and time. Caminus was the Titan that found in, yeah, you guessed it, Caminus, the gas giant orbiting planet that became home to the Solus Prime worshipping Camians. Now this place is interesting for many reasons, but principally because female Transformers all but went extinct on Cybertron, but they didn't here and they developed their own culture and religion. As for Caminus the Titan, he allowed his body to be disassembled to help with the colony's survival and development, so he was completely taken to pieces apart from his brain module, which was used to develop a way of communicating with the Titans called city speaking. So basically, he was dissected. Amalgamus Prime's Titan was called Navitas. He helped colonize a planet called Velocitron, which became home to a race of speed-loving Cybertronians, including Blur. Later, he developed a kind of Titan dementia. And I mean, it's understandable when you think about how old these guys are. When Windblade tried to use her city speaker skills on him, he forgot who she was in the middle of the conversation, but he got some cybertherapy from the residents of Caminus and started to get better. That is until Velocitron was devoured by, yes, you guessed it, Unicron. The Prime known as Micronus, pretty much the first Minicon, was partnered with Prion, who began populating a barren planet with little mini Cybertronian lives when it was attacked and sterilized by an organization called the Black Block Consortium, who hated all robotic forms of life. Primer, the first Prime created by Primus, had a very strong bond with Emisary, who, like his Prime, was loyal and devoted, so much so that after Primal was killed by Megatronus, Emisary memorialized his body inside his own before setting out into the great vastness of space. But guess who threw a spanner in the works? Yes, Shockwave messed up Emisary's internal system, so he crash-landed on a planet called Elonia. He was left there for so long that he was buried by tectonic shifts and landslides and general movements of the crust of the Earth. So in the millennia that followed, the planet's native population evolved and flourished without ever knowing that he was there. But when Unicron came a-knocking, the Autobots tried to space bridge them to safety, right? But it didn't work because of a signal being emitted by the dormant Titan. And Arcee had to track Emisary down and finally put him to rest by stabbing him in the brain with her swords. So another unfortunate end for our guy, who through no fault of his own was left immobile for perhaps millions of years until he had a couple of blades plunged into his fucking mind. Oh yeah, and after that he was devoured along with the rest of the planet by Unicron, of course. Next is an interesting one because he was an example of how not all Titans were pure of heart. Partnered with the treacherous Liege Maximo, Vigilem was restrained by his brethren during the horrible events leading up to the death of Solus Prime. Onyx insisted that Liege Maximo be imprisoned in his own Titan, but not before Vigilem was stripped of his higher conscious functions. That meant that Vigilem was trapped in Starship mode. A bunch of Liege Maximo's former followers who had come to see his true nature vowed to man the ship and keep him and Vigilem in their imprisoned state, with the captain even sacrificing his own life when a core breach threatened the security of the ship. Elita 1 eventually became the ship's captain, until Windblade was tricked into thinking that Vigilem was actually a ship called Casa and used her city-speaking skills to awaken Vigilem, who, blaming Metroplex for his imprisonment, vowed that the last thing that Metroplex would see would be the release of Liege Maximo. Elita 1 managed to get into his brain module and unloaded her blaster into it, but not before Vigilem downloaded his entire consciousness into Windblade, causing her to go into stasis lock. And not before Liege Maximo was freed. He vowed to avenge the death of his Titan and teleported away. Vigilem's body, still in Starship mode of course, was still of some use as it served as a makeshift flagship in the battle against Unicron in the defense of Cybertron. But coming under intense fire from Bludgeon's warship, Elita 1 ordered that it ram Unicron and managed to hit him in the face, killing herself and destroying the body of Vigilem in the process. But it bought her comrades a little more time to enact their plan to defeat the Chaosbringer. In the 2019 continuity, he was one of the most powerful Titans in there as well, and a faction called the Rise took control of him and directed him on a mission to destroy a space elevator known as the Tether, which was an umbilical of sorts that connected a colossal device known as the Winged Moon, which was basically a moon that had been repurposed as a machine that could siphon energon from the fabric of the universe itself and send it down to the surface of Cybertron. Vigilem made short work of that. So another Titan, called Lodestar, which was a much smaller and less experienced Titan, was sent to intercept him and stop him cutting the tether, but Vigilem was by far the more powerful and nearly killed Lodestar. After this, Vigilem disappeared and Lodestar got a bunch of upgrades should she ever have to face him again. But when that day came, Vigilem was still the more powerful and would have killed Lodestar had Lodestar not been equipped with an imploder that she rammed into his chest, and once detonated, it obliterated his body and sent the remaining pieces careening, spinning into a nearby star to be vaporized once and for all. So while we're talking about Lodestar, she formed an alliance with a city speaker called Lightbright, and the two became really good friends. Now, in the 2019 continuity, most of the Titans went into dormancy and ended up in orbit around Cybertron, but Lodestar was one of the few that didn't and stayed active, serving as a diplomatic vessel for Nominus Prime. Another of these that went dormant in orbit was Cargo Hold, a female Titan that loved peace, having apparently never fired a single shot, and having never taken part in a single battle. At some point, Megatron ordered that she deliberately be crashed into a memorial dedicated to all the beings that died in the War of the Threefold Spark. Now let's talk about the largest Titan ever to be forged, a Titan called Citadel, who was heavily involved in the War of the Threefold Spark against Exarchon, even destroying this universe's incarnation of Croaton, who had been possessed by Exarchon. Like Cargo Hold, Megatron messed with its coordinates, deliberately crashing it into the Sea of Rust, where it was devoured by all the rust worms that live in that shit, and that's not a good way to go. Now let's talk about a Titan that was built to be evil, and I'm talking about Nemesis. No, not that Nemesis. No, not that one either. I'm talking about the colossal artificial planet that started out in the Japanese continuity, specifically in the Beast Wars 2 cartoon, where it was designed by Galvatron to harvest the energies of a planet, even the particularly deadly Anglemoy energy. It was seen consuming moons, absorbing Saturn's rings, and consuming the gas from Jupiter, with its sights ultimately set on planet Gaia, basically Earth, with an aim of draining its energies and therefore killing all life on the place. But luckily, it was eventually destroyed by Leo Convoy and the Maximals. Now, it was never referred to specifically as a Titan in that continuity, but in the IDW continuity, after Shockwave stepped into the shoes of Onyx Prime, he managed to somehow attain the services and garner the loyalty of this monstrosity, which apparently otherwise would have been affiliated to Alpha Trion. Seems like a weird match, no? It even became the Prime's flagship at one point, which is surprising because this terrifying nightmare would block out the sun upon its arrival. Here we are to spread Cybertronian enlightenment to all the galaxy. Oh, that? Intimidating bots into carrying out Shockwave's will without him even having said a single word. It would even later join forces with Unicron. So Bumblebee smashed a single manned craft into the center of its eye, which incapacitated it, only to have Unicron assimilate it into its body, with it apparently becoming Unicron's eye, who then used it to destroy and kill Trypticon. But you know what? There's one more Titan that I want to talk about. A Titan that broke an entire empire. Almost nothing is known about the Titan called Waypoint. Now, this is one that was only mentioned in a detailing of the early days of the Cybertronian expansion by an ancient bot called Codexa. Now, Codexa was an advisor and mentor to Orion Pax in the 2019 IDW continuity. A bot that witnessed the Cybertronian expansion firsthand. And her experience of Titans, whatever that may be, led her to write what could be interpreted as a warning about the devastating capabilities of these things. And there's something about that phrasing, the Titan that broke an empire. Nemesis would destroy entire planets. But this is different, to bring an entire empire to its knees. As far as I know, Waypoint has never featured anywhere else. In fact, I couldn't even find a picture of him. And this is no doubt my imagination running away with me, but it's almost as if he's been erased from the records of history in some bid to keep his atrocities a secret. The same goes for the empire he supposedly broke, the Saurians, who seem to have been redacted from the past altogether. But if this is the case, you know what he did was bad, real bad. Hope you guys had a really good Halloween, and I'll see you all again really soon.